The topic is coping with anxiety and relaxation techniques. So that's what we'll be talking about in February. You will receive an email notification, of course, when the webinar is. It's an overwhelming win, a landslide, I would say. So I'd like to thank TrichStop for allowing us to meet as they always do. And let's go to our Q&A. Oh, because I always forget everything, let me do this now. So every month they offer a discount for people who attend the webinars. This month they increased the discount. So in the next 7 days, you have 50% discount for the first month. They used to give a $60 discount, and now it's a 50% discount, which is double. So take advantage of it. You have the coupon code here, and you can use it when you register. And without further ado, let me start with the questions. Could coping mechanisms for trichotillomania be discussed? So I'm not sure exactly which types of coping mechanisms you are referring to, but I did talk about some things that will, of course, help with hair pulling. If you want specific things for hair pulling, check out our webinar from December. It was about habit reversal training, and we talked about specific techniques that you can use. Could you do something about skin picking? There's a program for skin picking as well, and I have webinars about skin picking as well, so you can search for these as well. Type my name in YouTube and skin picking, and I'm sure something will come up. If you can't find anything, let me know. I will send you the links. There's something interesting about this. So I have these webinars about skin picking and obviously webinars about hair pulling, and every month I let everyone choose their topics. So independently, I let you vote for your topics, the other group for their topics, and most of the time you select identical topics. So I find that completely fascinating. The areas on the body that people pull, is there a reason why? So in theory, there's always a reason why, because nothing is random about our psyche, or our bodies for that matter. Whether or not the reason is complex and deep, that's not always the case. Sometimes it's availability. So you pull where you find something to pull, or you pull where it's easy to pull from. Other times you pull from those places that people cannot see. So often people will pull their armpits or their pubic area, because this is not something that others can see. Men often pull their beards, which sometimes has, also, let's say, psychological relevance, other than being just available or a good, convenient place to pick, so to pull so that no one sees it. So that would be the short answer. But there's no that I can see. There's no generic rule, like you can't open a dictionary of pulling and say, if you pull your eyebrows, this is what it means. The question is what that body part means to you and what pulling means to you. So for example, I've seen clients where pulling curly hairs, especially with people of color, it has a kind of cultural relevance as well. Not always the case, and not the case for everyone, but sometimes I've seen it be important in that context as well. Sometimes pulling hair from your scalp, if you're a woman, has to do with ideas about femininity. Sometimes it has to do with sexuality, sometimes with trauma. So it can really be related, but there's no strict 100% correlation. It's very individual. So this is something for you and your therapist, if you have one, to discover. Please turn up the volume if you can. Oh, I'm sorry if you couldn't hear me well. I will use a microphone next time. Sorry. How is impermeability different from OCD, and are they related? The first example is particularly gave me stood out to me. So impermeability is neither good nor bad. Like I said, for Kelly, this is just one way that we use our constructs. Some OCD also has displays of impermeable constraint. The question is what the construct is that's impermeable. I think I have a lot of impermeable constructs. Absolutely, as a person. It's just that they don't have anything to do with OCD or perfectionism. They have to do with certain standards that I have, but they're achievable for me, so they're not that difficult to bear. So impermeability has its rules. Let's say you have to undergo surgery. I mean, my God, you want your surgeon to be very impermeable because you want him to have only one way in which he does surgery, which is with your survival in mind. So sometimes impermeability is good and it's not necessarily a sign of psychopathology. Kelly created this system to avoid putting people in these boxes of having disorders. So he kind of said that the boundary between normal and pathological is really very blurry. So he kind of wanted to stay away from it. But yes, you're absolutely right. OCD, in my experience at least, and there's also some research in constructivist psychology that says that people who struggle with OCD tend to have impermeable constructs and something else. So I don't want to go into technical details of constructivist theory, but impermeability sure is a component. Do you have any tips for how I could set more realistic standards for myself and what I could do to avoid placing these rules that I made up in my head on others? I believe I gave you the SMART acronym could be a good start for you. And in terms of placing these rules on others or on yourself, the first thing that you kind of have to realize, and this is where constructivism is, I think, very helpful. CBT also has these techniques, but because I like constructivism, I'm going to stick with that, is that constructivism tells us that any rule that we come up with, any sense of self, any identity, anything that we do is a construct. I mean, we need constructs to live in the world, obviously, and to make sense of the world, but it's still a construct. It's not a truth. It's not a truth about who you are. It's not a truth about the world. It's your theory about the world and your theory about yourself. You could have more or less evidence to support your theory, but it's still a theory. So for me, and this was not an intentional thing, but over the years of kind of reading constructivism and doing therapy, I've learned to look at my ideas as really just ideas. And that's really helpful. Sometimes I will have these grand ambitions, like for something that, like I want to write a paper, and then I will imagine like what a brilliant paper that will be, but I know it's just my idea. And I don't really expect the paper to be what I imagined it would be because I don't have that much free time. You always collaborate with someone, they have different ideas. So you just take your ideas as ideas. If you like philosophy, Richard Rorty, the American pragmatist, has a great book. It's called Contingency, Irony, Solidarity. And in that book, he introduces this notion of an ironist. So you can read a little bit about that. Ironists would never impose their rules on other people because they would know their rule is not a truth. It's just something that they think is good, but not necessarily others. I think developing that kind of approach to your thinking is something that works well. Topic: homeopathic products or do-it-yourself recipes for topical numbing or soothing of skin before and after pulling. Things to use that help distract or soothe the skin and that can reduce the urge to pull. So I know next to nothing about homeopathy, and I don't really dwell that much in that kind of complementary medicine, but it might be a good idea to address in general sort of the kind of skincare that could help skincare or hair care, so anything that would help minimize the effects of pulling. I will put that on the list and then see if there's interest for that. Thank you. I really relate to it's all or nothing, like with the example of I feel amazing that I didn't pull or utter failure that I did. What is a practical way to deal with this? I've started working on being kinder to myself. This is something that will definitely come out as you work on being kinder to yourself. If you're working on being kinder to yourself, you're actually working on self-compassion because there's a very short definition of kindness, which is that kindness is compassion in action. So it's doing compassionate things for yourself. So that's certainly going to come out from there. But in general, so what you can do is any of the techniques that I mentioned and that I said that kind of increase propositional thinking. So that would be an antidote for that, for sure. And also what I said to the previous question, which is to understand that all or nothing thinking is just the best that you can do now, but it's not everything that you can do, and it's most certainly not everything that can be said about you. So it's just your construct. I actually repeat that to myself sometimes. Like if I'm stuck in traffic and then I become upset and angry, I just think this is all a construct, so don't sweat it. What was the self-compassion book called? So it's the Self-Compassion Workbook by Christine Neff. I believe there's another co-author, but I cannot think of his name to save my life now. But Christine Neff for sure. She's essentially the prime researcher we have on self-compassion. If you're interested in a looser but more meditation-oriented approach, I recommend Loving Kindness, the Revolutionary Art of Happiness by Sharon Salzberg. That's a really remarkable book. It's written from a Buddhist perspective, although she's not, it's more of a Buddhist psychological perspective. She's not preaching the religion, but just keep in mind that she uses a lot of Buddhist terms. But that book is absolutely remarkable. That book is, I think, one of the best books I've ever read on meditation. It's accessible, it's practical, it's written by someone who obviously has extensive personal experience. So that's also something that I can recommend. There's another book written by Dalai Lama's former translator about self-compassion. I believe it's called The Brave Heart. That one's not as practical, but it's an interesting read. How do you stop yourself from clinging to impermanent things? Forgiveness, self-compassion, mindfulness in general. So that will be it. If you prefer something more CBT, like old-fashioned CBT, cognitive diffusion techniques would be that. Stoic philosophy also helps with that. So there are a lot of books now written by people who are kind of trying to rehabilitate Stoicism and adapt the philosophy to modern life. So a lot of it has to do with acceptance and letting go. So that's also something that you can maybe investigate. It's definitely not something that you. Sometimes I struggle to convey to people how psychological change is not instantaneous. It's not like taking a pill for a headache and then you just don't have a headache anymore. I mean, even ibuprofen doesn't work that fast. So when we talk about stopping yourself from clinging, that's always a process. So it's something that you like. There you go. Mindfulness is a tool. So choose a tool for yourself and then start patiently cultivating it. Reward yourself for any success that you make, and over time you will make progress. But you have to keep in mind that it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Thank you very much. Lots of useful stuff here. Best wishes, Simon. Well, you're welcome, Simon. I'm happy you enjoyed it. Join us in February when we talk about anxiety and relaxation. Thank you. You're welcome. How should I handle when my 10-year-old gets angry at himself when he doesn't do something correctly? Well, I think the way that kids learn how to treat themselves is by seeing how we treat them and how we treat ourselves. So maybe kindness and compassion is something that you also kind of need to learn to extend to yourself. And also you can give an example to your son. If he gets upset with himself, just be kind. But you don't have, if he's 10 years old, he might be too young to explain what self-compassion and kindness is. Show, don't tell. Hug him, reward him with something, help him do something that usually makes him feel better. Usually the younger the kids are, and also that goes for adults when they become infantile, which we all do at some point. It's much better to show than to tell. So words don't carry that much weight. Gestures are much more efficient. Sometimes a hug is enough. Also, there are books like if you think your son has an actual problem more than just a phase, there are books where you can teach him. There are books about compassion for children and about mindfulness for children. One of them was written by John Kabat-Zinn's wife. I believe her name is Mila Kabat-Zinn. I haven't read the book, but a friend of mine who's a child psychologist said it's quite good. So that's why I know. Hi, and thank you for this amazing webinar. Is there good exercises besides meditating that we can do that help with self-awareness, since our disorder can happen even during work? If you're talking about developing awareness of pulling, go again. I will suggest our habit reversal training webinar, because we talk about awareness training there, because it's part of the habit reversal. So I talk about different ways you can become aware of pulling. I understand you can't really meditate while you work, unless that's your job. So what you can do is you can, if you pull with only one hand, you can make sure that you always have a very noisy bracelet on that hand. So you will hear it when it makes a sound. Or if you have money to invest, you can use the habit aware thing, the gadget that will vibrate or make a sound when you move your hand to pull. So it helps you train the gadget, and then specifically it alarms you when you start pulling. This is definitely not going to help you stop pulling altogether, but it will help you develop awareness. So it's a very good first step to take. The desire to be superhuman or extra special resonated with me, embarrassing but true. Well, there's no need to be embarrassed, sorry, because it's just what it is. It's a fact of your existence. Now that you recognize it, you can accept it and work on it, but I don't think embarrassment helps. What kind of idea or concept can we replace it with? I've learned to laugh at myself, which helps me let go enough to realize this, accept it, and relax. But are there certain ways to reimagine myself? Well, the first thing that comes to my mind, like just off the bat now, is the work of another psychoanalyst. His name was, oh God, Winnicott. I thought, how is it possible that I've forgotten like a second after I just thought of him? So Winnicott had this idea, although he was talking about parenting, but a lot of change is about self-parenting. So I think it's an appropriate metaphor. He talked about being a good enough parent. He said that there is no such thing as a perfect parent because every parent makes mistakes. It's kind of inevitable because children are unpredictable and people are fallible. And he says that all you need to do to raise a healthy child is to be good enough. And I really like this this concept, even though sometimes when I talk to people who are perfectionists and I say, well, maybe good enough is something you can strive to, they usually get very upset and even offended. Like, what do you mean all I need to be is good enough? And I have to admit that as a person, I used to have difficulties with the good enough approach when I was younger. I remember uh, one of my first jobs out of medical school was in this psychiatric hospital. And a part of my job was also to do research and write papers and all that. And so, because you do clinical work all day, writing papers is usually something you do instead of sleeping, especially when you're a young doctor. And so I was bordering on obsessive with how many times I would revise my manuscripts and then just like read all the resources 10 times, references, think about them, try to just portray them as accurately as possible. And I remember my supervisor at the time, and I'm forever grateful to her. She was really remarkable, and she's my friend now. And she told me once, you will never do anything if this is how you approach work. Like, are you out of your mind? This is not a Shakespearean sonnet you're writing a paper. A paper is meant to convey the results of our research, not to be a superb reading experience. It's just supposed to be good enough for publishing. And I remember when she said that, just good enough for publishing, I thought, what? And then, so I, of course, didn't listen to her. And then I kept creating like 12 drafts of something. And then I sent it to this journal finally when I was done. And so they accepted the paper, but as always, reviewers had a lot of things to say and things to add. And when they sent me back the manuscript with all these kind of red, changes made and questions and remarks, I nearly had a breakdown. I thought, what? I spent days polishing this. Like, what is this nonsense? And like, and the kind of the stupidity there, I said it, of most of these remarks really upset me because I thought it was beside the point. And then my supervisor says, of course they're stupid and of course they're mainly beside the point, but so is your, attempts to create a stylistic masterpiece out of something that is not meant to be that. A paper is good enough if people who read the paper understand what our ideas are. And then I thought that she actually might have a point. Because when I read scientific papers, I'm really not reading them to be, just amazed at how beautifully they're written. No, I read them because I think there's something interesting there and I need the idea. So whether or not it's going to be written well or written badly, I don't care as long as I understand the concept. And communicating the concept is the core of good enough. If the author has managed to kind of convey his idea, whether or not it was written beautifully or it was written horribly, doesn't matter. He was good enough. So maybe that's how you can start. How to be good enough is to decide what is it that you want to achieve and then just stick to that one thing. Kind of invert impermeable. If permeable is 9 out of 10, you go 1 out of 10. Just find that one thing that's the key and just go with that. How will you call it and conceptualize it specifically, in your life? That's of course a different thing, and you need to adjust the concept to your own ideas and your circumstances. This is why I don't like to give, general recipes, because I think everyone needs to find their own. But good enough is, I think, a vague enough concept that people can take it and make it their own. Thank you for this presentation. It was very helpful. You're welcome, and I'm glad it was helpful. How come sometimes the wave of needing to pull is so bad? Why does the urge come in waves? So it doesn't come in waves for everyone, but for many people, for sure. There are several reasons why it might come in waves, and maybe one of them resonates with you. Sometimes it's because there really is a triggering event, which is very intense. So naturally, the urge is also intense. At other times, it's because over a period of a week or more, you kind of accumulate tension. And even if you pull in the meantime, you don't necessarily pull so much to relieve all of the tension. And then once it's accumulated, it just explodes at once. And then what you have is a pulling trance, which can be quite intense and can cause a lot of damage. So these would be some common mechanisms that I can think of. It can also be because the self-punishment or stuff like this, but that's, I think, not as common. It usually has to do with the process of how tension and anxiety accumulates. Can you write the name of the philosopher? I didn't quite catch it or know how to spell it. So it's Richard Rorty, and I will spell it in my answer here. Richard. He's one of the truly great American philosophers. He's brilliant. Can you repeat the title of the book again? I'm not sure which one, but the books that I mentioned were Contingency, Irony, Solidarity by Richard Rorty, but that's philosophy. Loving Kindness, The Revolutionary Art of Happiness by Sharon Salzberg, and the Self-Compassion Workbook. And then there's another one that I mentioned, which is the Brave Heart. No, it's not the Brave Heart. Scratch that. I'm not sure about that title. I don't want to mislead you. But it's by Dalai Lama's translator, so it's easy to find. If you've been pulling for more than 10 years and focus mostly on eyebrows and eyelashes, is it actually possible to fully recover from this? Very few men appear to have had the same problem as it mostly appears to affect women. What would you recommend in terms of a pathway for self-help towards this? So I agree with your assessment that it mostly seems to affect women. But even, so yes, just without complicating things, I don't want to keep you here forever. Yes, it mostly affects women, but men also pull, and it doesn't matter whether or not you're a man or a woman, your prognosis is the same. So yes, you can stop pulling. If it's been going on for so long, you might have to be patient with yourself and kind of pace yourself, because 10 years of a habit doesn't disappear overnight. But of course you can stop, yes. Especially in my experience, pulling eyebrows for whatever reason is easier to stop than, let's say, pulling hair from your scalp or pubic area. Yeah, so I'll stop myself there. Is there a familiar hereditary component to trick? I've seen it happen in families, but it's mostly about learned mechanisms and internalized behaviors. There's no solid evidence that it's genetic. There is some evidence that it might be related in part to certain genes that are related to self-grooming. But the studies that I've read only dealt with correlation, and correlation is not the same as causation, so we can't really make any conclusions based on that. There's only 1 or 2 studies that I can think of, and the samples were really small, so for now there's absolutely no relevant evidence to support that. It seems like pubic hair is really common for trick, but even the trick community treats it as taboo. Are there resources available or tips for that specific area? I think all the resources that you can use for any other pulling site go for this as well. I'll put it on the list, and then maybe we can offer that as a topic. Because now that I think about it, there are really no resources that I can think of. Maybe I can kind of summarize what I have and then offer that for you if you're interested as a webinar. But I agree that even the tree community sees that as a taboo, because sometimes TrichStop is done in writing. And even in writing, people seem to be embarrassed to share that. Even though I don't see you, you're not in front of me, you don't see me, it still is quite embarrassing for people. I noticed in our support groups that there are minors who seek help since with family and friends, and they tell them to just stop, and even some receive negative feedback from them also. What could you recommend for them to inform the parents or for them to have help, since many can't afford therapy or counseling? So there are free resources out there. So our webinars are available to anyone. If they need advice, they can email our support. They will give advice when someone asks for it. There are a few books. If you go to our website, TrichStop.com, there should be somewhere, I'm not sure exactly where you click, but there are a few recommendations with books about Trich. There are some books, there's a book called Overcoming Body-Focused Repetitive Behaviors that came out last year, and it's nice and informative, so that one's also okay. The TLC website has this very good and nice kind of reviews of what hair pulling is, so there's that. Our website also has some blogs that deal with hair pulling, although not too many of them. Our website also has a forum, and then they can register and exchange experiences there as well. So that's what comes to my mind from pre-roll as far as free resources go. What time does the webinar end? Well, quite soon, since I'm running out of my voice. But usually the first part is about an hour, and in the second part, I stay as long as there are questions or as long as I can talk. Thank you for sharing. You're welcome. How can I give up perfectionism when the fruits of it, excellent school or work performance, are always rewarded? I feel like it always strengthens and reaffirms my resolve to be perfect. Aren't you kind of implying that without this very strict and, I dare say, sadistic part of you, you wouldn't really be successful? You're not smart or good at school because you torture yourself with high expectations. You're smart because you're smart, and you do well because you're smart. So, and also put it this way, if you're only successful for others, then yes, if you give up perfectionism, you will probably not be motivated to be successful. But if you're successful because this is authentically your desire and something that you like, then even without perfectionism, you will be successful. So to give an example, I really like to read. And because I like to read, I've learned, and also because my life is kind of scattered all over the place, I've learned that I'm fluent in a few languages, 5 to be precise. If I share this with people, they usually think it's impressive, even though I don't think it is, because it didn't really take much effort for me, apparently. I don't know, it's easy for me. If I had to learn languages to impress someone, I would not speak a single one other than, well, maybe one I would probably speak. But I do that because I like it, because then I can read books in Italian, and there's like a specific pleasure when you can read something in the language in which it was written. There are some books that have, like The Kingdom of This World by Alejo Carpentier, which I liked when I read it in English, but when I read it in Spanish, it was, my God, it was like an aesthetic orgasm. It was beautiful. So like, that's why I did it. I did it because I really enjoyed it. And people don't really have to have any kind of opinion. I do it because I truly love it. Validation and that kind of external confirmation is like, whatever, nice to hear, but it really doesn't do much for me. I do it because I like it. And there are things that I've done in my life that my family thought were completely crazy, but I did them because they were for me. Remember in the beginning what Brené Brown says about self-focused versus other-focused. If your success in school is actually self-focused, if it's your desire, then giving up perfectionism will change nothing. In fact, it will allow you to go through school with less anxiety. But if it's something you do for others, then yes, it will go away. But you will not mind that it goes away. Not a question, but thank you for this reach out to the public, since many don't have the resources to obtain the knowledge that you're providing. So thank you and have a wonderful weekend. You too. And yeah, so this is why I like the webinars, because I know that not everyone can afford therapy and not everyone's ready to start therapy. So people like to hear things and see stuff. So yeah, I think this is why I do these. So you're welcome. It's truly my pleasure. I need to go now. It's 1 a.m. in England. Thank you for such a good informative presentation. I hope to join your sessions again, Marcus. You're welcome. And I think this would actually be a good time to stop also, because questions keep coming in, and the more I answer, the more questions keep coming in. And I have some physiological needs, such as needing to drink water, that I would have to attend to. And I was highly imperfect and did not leave a glass of water here. So this then we'll stop here, and I hope to see you next month, and we'll be talking about anxiety and relaxation techniques. So I wish you a pleasant evening, day, morning, wherever you are, and see you in a month.